Welcome to this new episode of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD. Today I have the great pleasure of having with me Sirisha Kuchimanchi. Sirisha is the founder of Sahita, a global community for South Asian women for career and financial empowerment. She hosts the podcast Women, Career and Life and the radio show Life Beats with Sirisha. Her podcast is listed in the top 30% of Spotify podcasts. Her mission is to prove practical ideas and resources for women to further their career and life goals as they strive forward financial independence. Sirisha is a former global engineering and manufacturing executive from Texas Instruments, a Fortune 200 company. She co-chaired the Tech and Manufacturing Women's ERG, which supported over 500 employees across 3 continents and 8 countries. Sirisha is an immigrant from India and earned her doctorate in material science and engineering from Carnegie Mellon University. Her aim is to promote gender equality by empowering more women to take control of their careers and finances. Welcome to Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD Sirisha.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having me here. And I'm really excited to chat. And this is my first LinkedIn live where I'm sitting on the other side of the mic.
Oh, there we
Looking
go.
forward to it.
There's always the first time, and I hope it's going to be. I'm going to be as good a host as you are on your.
Oh, I'm sure it'll be wonderful.
Sirisha, so I did just present you fairly quickly. Can you share a little bit more about you, about your journey, your PhD, and then how you came to be in this mission that you are today of empowering women in being independent financially and successful in a space that I think traditionally has been very much male dominated, let's say, like engineering and manufacturing.
Yeah, that's true. And there's quite a few of us. So I'm originally from India. I studied physics in India. My bachelor's and master's is in physics. And I came to graduate school to the US, to CMU. And I finished my master's and I started working in early 2000s. And I've had sort of a meandering path around it. So I got laid off from my first job less than a year into it. So it was a sort of transformational experience. Now, when I look back, going through it, obviously not.
No,
It was hard at that point.
of course.
But as people are going through layoffs now, and there's so much conversation around it, and at that point, people didn't talk about it. There was no LinkedIn.
Mhm.
So now it's much more accepted in a way. And I just want people to know who are listening to this or who may listen to the recording that as hard as it may be, and depending on which stage you are, it will work out well. It will be a pivotal point and it gives you time to think. So try to realize that the layoff has nothing to do with you. It's the other external circumstances that define it, and for you to look for support in LinkedIn through podcasts and other mediums to have
Mhm.
people to support you.
Yeah, there's much less. I feel that there's less taboo around it now than there might have had when it happened to you.
Absolutely. So actually, yes, that was my first podcast episode, was talking about the layoff.
Oh wow, okay,
That's what we
okay,
started with.
that's
And
super interesting.
so I worked for a few years and then I quit work to be a stay-at-home mom. So I stayed home for 3 years with my kids.
Hmm.
So I had taken a break from my PhD when I started working, and at that point I chose to go back to graduate school and finish up my thesis when I was staying home. So I finished up my thesis and then a few years later went back to work for TI. And most of my time I started working in development, and working with client services, working for vendors, for companies, and then moved into essentially largely the factories, into
Okay.
manufacturing and engineering. So it's been a wonderful journey. There's a lot to learn. I think semiconductors now are in the spotlight because of the
Hmm.
global landscape. The supply chain constraints, I think last year kind of made people think, oh, there is this thing that, chips other than potato chips, there are other chips that matter to us.
Yes.
So it's got a spotlight, and the US has, this chip act and this humongous investment in semiconductor industry. There's a lot
Mhm.
of companies building factories and stuff. So it's a wonderful area to work in, because
Mhm.
if you think about it, its products touch everything in our
Yeah.
lives. Like there's nobody who doesn't have semiconductor technology touching their life at any point of time.
Yeah, no, today it's true. In any little thing that you might have that's not just mechanical, but that's even just electrical and electronics, it's there. And then now everyone has one of these in their pocket, and,
Exactly.
and there we
That
go.
one, yeah.
Oh yeah. So, Sirisha, one of the things that you mentioned in passing has a lot to do with what we are talking about today, which is how women can navigate uh, career transitions and entering these domains which are not traditionally, which traditionally have more are more associated to men. And the first thing that you mentioned was I stopped my PhD. I became a mom. I was a stay-home mom, and then I went back to my PhD. And this question of parenthood is one of the big ones for women,
Mhm.
young women, in whichever career journey. But let's say, graduate school, it's 5 to 7 years. In this age, that might be the age that you want to start a family. Can you talk a little bit about how that went? How did you negotiate and navigate interrupting and then resuming? Because I'm really, really curious about, what tips and and advice you can give to other young women out there.
Yeah, so when I finished my masters and I'd started my PhD work, so I'd done a lot of the research when I was there. But when I found my first job, I moved because my husband had moved, and I started working. I realized I had to take a break because I couldn't continue my thesis work at that point.
Mm,
So when this was about 5 6 years later, all PhD programs have sort of a time limit, right? You
of
pass
course.
these exams, and the exams also have a time when the timer kicks off and it expires. So it was something that I was at the back of my mind wanting to finish, and I knew that the timer was going to kick off. So I ended up, my department, my advisor, first of all, and the department administration, the head of the department, they were very nice. So I asked them if I could extend it, and,
Hmm.
under these circumstances, and had to get permissions. And since I lived in Dallas and not in Pittsburgh, there were a couple of classes I still had to take. So I was able to show them the classes that I wanted to take and get permission to take them in a different city so that it was transferable. So these were all predetermined to take like two external classes. So I took them and finished those. And my advisor, I just had to work out some of the economics of funding and stuff. But
Of
at
course.
that point, I'd worked, so I didn't have that many credits left to take in the university. So it was that much made it a bit simpler for me to do. And it's interesting because when I was doing that, so I actually started my PhD program a little before I became a stay-at-home mom. So
Okay.
I had a 2-year old at home. I was expecting my second one, and I was working and taking classes. So it was like
Okay.
my plate was like way overwhelming at that point.
Yes.
So I was like, okay, and we kind of decided that I would probably take a break when I had kids. So this at this point, it was like, okay, it's time to take a break. You cannot stretch. I mean, doing two things itself is hard, and this is kind of like three and four things on it. So it was a bit much to take on.
Hmm.
And so I was able to work it out. So if anyone's listening, right, I think oftentimes we think we can't do it, but we should reach out and ask the people. So I was able to work out that I would travel. I think I only traveled 2 3 times because I had to go for my preliminary presentation,
Hmm.
and then I had to go for my defense, and then my graduation. And a lot of it was through email and things. And I was collaborating with some other students I hadn't met on
Okay.
some theoretical calculations, so reaching out through email and phone calls. So especially with technology the way it is now, I'm talking about a long time ago, a
Hmm.
lot of it can be done virtually and stuff. But it also helps to build the connections, because I'd already had connections with my advisor, with the people who were on my committee and things. I'd met them before, I knew them when I was a grad student, and I kept in touch intermittently. It had helped to kind of smoothen that thing a bit. So
Hmm.
no matter what, I think those personal connections are important, and not hesitating to ask for help when you need it.
Of course, personal relations are very important. It's something I try to share all the time, and developing your network, close network, but also wider network is
Hmm.
so important, especially for later on, for 5 years from now. If you start working on it right away when you start your PhD, then you have a whole, garden of relationships that you can that can be mentors, that can, that can be sounding boards, or that can eventually be interested in hiring you in the future. But here we're still talking about during the PhD. I have another question. So you
Mhm.
had a 2-year-old, you start the program. What was your motivation to go into the program? What were you seeing? When I get my degree, I will what? Was it teaching, or were you already looking into industry?
So I was already in the industry. So I come a family line of academics. My father was a faculty, my grandfather was a faculty, my other
Okay.
grandfather was a teacher. So I come from a line of teachers in a way. And my sister also was actually graduating with her PhD at the same time, and she was she was interested in the academic field.
Okay.
And I did consider it. It was at the back of my mind. I had worked in industry, but when I graduated, I wanted to I did consider, I looked for some faculty positions, but really I think industry called to my heart because I'd already worked. I kind of like the fact that I could see the product so quickly and,
Hmm.
see that I could touch it and feel it, kind of different from a research aspect because research is kind of long and it's a
Yes,
different type of journey. It's a different mindset, and I
definitely.
liked it because actually it's interesting you asked it because when I went back, I got called back whether I wanted after my break to see if I wanted to return to TI, and the
Hmm.
hiring manager asked me, "Hey, you've just gotten your PhD. Why are you coming back to work here? Why are you not going into academia?" But
Hmm.
I think just my mindset, teaching, preparing classes, I think it also intimidated me a little bit. I don't know if I
Yeah.
was able to do that. I preferred working in the industry, so I decided to go back to what I was doing.
Which is totally natural to go through those years and starting to see what being a professor is, and thinking, what, this is not actually what I want to do. It's totally natural. Well, the interesting thing is that they're what they said what they said to you, what they told you was, so you did a PhD and now you're coming back. And this shows that people on the other side, so outside of university, are still not seeing that there's a huge pool of PhDs that come out each year, and that only 20% become professors, and maybe 40-50% stay around academia. It's still the public outside still has this idea of, oh, you start a PhD, you become a professor, and it's an impossibility, at least today.
Yeah, and that's true because I think most of us who get PhDs, maybe not most, a large percentage of people who get PhDs do not work in the field that they are in, right?
Hmm.
I think it's a toolkit. It's a mindset, it's a way of thinking. If you ask me what I use for my PhD on a regular basis, it's kind of hard for me to explain. But
Hmm.
I think in some ways, maybe the sort of the technical adaptability, the way to pull things together, maybe
Hmm.
that comes from it. It's hard for me to differentiate which step of the journey what I skill I picked up, but it definitely helps. And you're right, people go because PhD programs are obviously a narrow focus. That's the whole point of it, right?
Yes.
You can go into academia, and even academics that I know, like friends and colleagues who have gone into academia, some stay the course, some have pivoted and expanded their scope of research into something completely interdisciplinary and new, so they
Hmm.
do use all those skills together. And even when you go into industry, some still stay that that they keep in their focus area, but you just take these skills. And for me, my career has had a lot of pivots, a lot of different groups I've moved in. That's kind of what, looking
Hmm.
back, interests me. I like the change of it. So it's helped me, like, and PhD for me also was very personal. I wanted to get it for my own reasons, I guess,
Hmm.
maybe to prove it for myself. So that
Hmm.
was part of the journey as well.
Of course. And so now I have another question that I'll keep for after. But now you just mentioned that you don't exactly use the skills that you developed in your PhD today. What's your Can you describe your position, what you do, and what's your day to day in the industry that you're in?
Yeah, so I was a TI. I actually just left my job a few months ago, but I was there on and off for about 15 to 17 years. I worked for another company, which was a vendor called Applied Materials, and then I worked at TI for so many years. And I didn't use the technological aspect. Like, I worked on magnetic materials. I didn't use
Okay.
that because this was semiconductor stuff. But on a daily basis, so I'll give you two, three different job descriptions because this
Hmm.
is for people who might decide to pursue different things. So I worked in the factory in engineering roles for a lot of time. And when you're working a manufacturing role, manufacturing in any factories, especially these factories which are $1 billion investments, have equipment that are in the millions, they're producing any operations, like doesn't matter whether you make a car or you make a little widget, they are turning 24/7, right? They
Okay.
have personnel, people who operate on a shift basis, and engineering, which tends to operate on a non-shift basis. So in that, I would a large part of my engineering was looking at data, looking at how the operations are running, like charts and stuff, making sure that they're running. So there's always a sustainability aspect when you do these roles, which is making sure everything is running properly and you're trying to optimize the process. There's a troubleshooting aspect, which is where the problem solving comes in, which is kind of fun, sometimes challenging, where you're trying to solve the problem yourself up to a point, but
Hmm.
oftentimes you work in teams or groups, or there'll be a lot of meetings as well, trying to solve the problem. Maybe this technology is not yielding and producing what you want it to, and you need it to get better, or something went wrong and you're trying to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes there's development as well. You're making changes proactively. There's some reactive part of it, and then there's some proactive change you're trying to drive, either for getting more yield, reduce cost because it's an operations, or you're taking on new technology and you're changing or transforming the portfolio. So there's all of these pieces happening. So that's what I did largely in my
Hmm.
engineering role. Then about a few years later, I moved into quality, which the
Okay.
role was a bit different as well.
It,
So
it it looks to me that in the engineering role, actually, is that the job name, like engineer, or is there, if people want to look?
I was called a yield engineer in a
Okay.
factory. Usually semiconductor companies have process engineers which work on the process side. Then they have equipment engineers who actually work on the equipment.
Hmm.
There's PVD tools, there's photolithography tools. So there's like a lot of different tools.
Of course.
Then the yield engineering and product engineering are the groups which look at the line health, and they're looking at it more, because process and equipment are focused on one part of the equipment or the process itself. These people are looking at the whole line health. So there's different things. And I think for people in engineering, and this is true of every job, engineering is, every company may or may not have engineering, but there's always, you know HR, IT, facilities, those functions exist. Non-technical functions exist in every organization because
Hmm.
you need them. F&O, finance and operations, these are things that exist in every organization that you do. So when I moved to quality is oftentimes one of the adjacent organizations that support these kind of factories. So I worked with internal customers, which was the engineering, because now I was sitting in a sort of adjacent organization to solve the
Hmm.
problems. We worked with our internal customers, also end up being oftentimes in a lot of organizations, your business partners and things. And
Of
then I
course.
worked with external customers as well, because I had a huge portfolio of like uh, external customers that we produced products for. So I would work on those. A lot of it was collaboration. A lot of it was trying to understand each one's, solving the internal problems, solving the external problems, and also proactive and reactive, right?
Hmm.
There's always going to be a reactive part, no matter what job function you have. But as
Of
much
course.
as it to move to it proactively was what my aim was, because I tend to lean on the technical aspect, but I also tend to lean a lot on relationship building. And relationship building is not to say, "Hey, I want to be nice to you." It's by solving the problem. Like,
Of
here
course.
is what we are working on, and bringing people in, stakeholders into the discussion, because you need them. Because oftentimes in these kind of roles, like quality and things, you own a part of the problem, but you can't actually go fix it yourself because the
Of
engineer
course.
still has to work on it. So it's leaning into that and leveraging that, so that, and I think what is important is when you have these kind of roles is to make sure the other person understands your perspective and what the customers are saying, because oftentimes we might just go and say fix this, but we don't tell them why and what, and not necessarily the how. But I think once you start showing them what that means, I think then it kind of brings people in. And I would do a lot of the proactive building before,
Mhm.
because when a reactive situation hits, in my mind, you're under too much stress
Of
to
course.
do a good job.
Yeah, it makes total sense what you say, and it feels to me like building relationships, like you said, is not being nice. It's bringing value with creativity in solving problems for other people. It makes total sense, and then that's how organically your network grows. Now, this makes me think of something else, because you mentioned 15-ish years of working in that space, or 17, and you did mention the importance of asking for help, and I kind of see that as getting mentorship in graduate school as a woman. And actually, we have Inas Aref here saying that I definitely agree on the importance of networking and asking for help when you need it, especially for women in STEM. And so, in all those years, you had that first conversation with where they said, so you went to do a PhD and now you're coming back to work. How how was that for you? How did those conversations go? How did you make the case of, yes, I'm a woman, yes, I'm actually an immigrant coming from India, but yes, I have a place in this team and in this organization? How did that go for you?
I think, and this maybe, I'm going to play the dichotomous role, okay? I'm going to play
Hmm.
devil's advocate here. I think oftentimes women who pursue STEM careers, we often are the minority, right? Like I do a radio show, so I interviewed this lady who'd studied mechanical engineering. She was one out of 70
Okay.
kids in her class. So
Oh, wow.
I think in sometimes you don't think about it. I didn't think about it so much at work. I know I talk about women in empowerment, but when you're living that experience, sometimes you're not thinking about it, right?
Hmm.
It's just a norm. You're used to this thing. I think when you notice it when there are all women in the room, that's when I noticed it. When I ended up in meetings when I had all women, was then you kind of like think about it, because
Hmm.
usually through school, college, university, you don't tend to have that many. There's always like a it's always like that, 20-30% bucket that seems to hit. But almost every organization, and if they don't have it, they have employee resource groups and areas around them. And the thing is, women need women to support, but you need the men to support them as well. You need
Hmm.
allies, you need advisors. And I had incredible mentors, both women and men, who challenged, who pushed, who said, why are you not doing this? So this is the thing, when you have managers who can be what you might consider tough on you, there's two aspects to it. Sometimes they are tough and maybe it's not the most best relationship, but oftentimes when they're tough, they may be challenging you because they think you're capable of doing more. And
Hmm.
that's kind of how I tend to look at it. And it's something to unwrap, right? They may not say, okay, why did you do this? And they may push you, because there's sometimes when they've pushed you and they've come and offered or had conversations about certain opportunities with you and you're hesitant. I tell especially the women, because research shows that women, if there's a job opening and there are five things, unless all five boxes are ticked, often women don't apply. But men,
Hmm.
have one box and they usually apply. So when women are tapped for opportunities, they need to take that opportunity.
Hmm.
Unless there is some extenuating, other circumstances.
Of course.
Don't hesitate to take the job because of you're not sure you can do it or confidence. The way I look at it is, if someone taps you on the shoulder, you obviously have the skills. They think you can do it, which means they're already vested in it. They're going to support
Hmm.
you. So I think it's asking for, when I say asking for help, I don't mean to asking for someone to solve your problem. I mean, a lot of the times I did, and other people I work with, and this is my expectation when I work with someone is, I will show you how to do it once, but I expect you to do the work yourself and come to me for help. It is not hand holding, right? And then asking a lot of questions. I think no matter which stage you are in your career, especially when you're new, you
Hmm.
have to ask questions, a lot of questions. Take notes and ask questions, because people want to know that you're hearing them, and then you come back and follow up on the conversation. That's how you're going to learn. And there'll be meetings where you'll know nothing, and it's okay to ask the question. Maybe you want to think about how you want to frame it, so you come out, your presence and your sort of personal brand comes out a certain way. But think about it, and maybe prep in the beginning for every meeting to see what is the outcome you want. Because like I said, I was when I got laid off, actually when I returned to work, I got a call, to come back for one of the
Hmm.
roles. And then when I came back, I came back the second time. And on hindsight, I realized there must have been something in the interactions I had that kind of helped happen that happened, right?
Of
So you
course.
never know where you're sowing those seeds. Because when I went back to work, one of the times the call I got was not from somebody I expected. I didn't even know they knew who I was really
Hmm.
in the organization. I used to sit in their meetings. They used to be the team leader and, participate, but I was very quiet then. And you never know what seeds you're sowing and what people are taking away. So
Hmm.
it is
Hmm.
important to ask questions, important to engage. And I know a lot of us tend to be introverts. So maybe, find one or two people. I had like one or two engineers who really helped me learn the stuff. I would ask questions and find the right people. Not everyone wants to answer questions. Some people are not willing to engage. So you have to find the right connections to do this.
Hmm. And the people who will champion you even where you're not there anymore, and then you get a call.
Exactly. And those are the people. And you're never going to know who they are, not
Mhm,
necessarily.
mhm.
I mean, you can cultivate them and you can do your due diligence. And sometimes you'll find out who they are, and sometimes you may not know. And you'll be
Yeah,
surprised by who will do it also. So,
yeah, no, for sure. And I guess what you're saying is, once you're in an organization, whichever professional interactions you have within the organization, try to always bring some value to the table. and
yes.
and because those are the seeds that you're sowing, and that eventually will give fruit, be it like what happened to you, or being tapped for a promotion, or for being invited into another department because they feel that you're a great, that would be you'll be a great addition to their team. It makes total sense to me. Now, um the so we have mentioned this part of about kind of mentorship, and which is interesting because the way you put it is, be you didn't say go get a mentor. What you kind of said, and I'm going to distill it in a few words, is be a mentee. And why I'm saying that is, ask the questions. Be on the floor, try to solve problems, but ask from your superior, from the person who knows more, and interact with them in that way. And by acting as a mentee, I feel like organically mentors will come out of the woodwork and kind of take that that mantle.
Yeah, that's partly true. You will see mentorship is so many things, right? And I urge everyone to get a mentor. You have to. So mentorship can be an infinitesimal meetup. We think of it as this grand thing with a title and everything, which you will have. Like I have mentors who I've had for years now, and it started with seeing them in one of these forums. A lot of it was also through my women's ERG forums. So I met somebody, I'd gotten a role and asked them, if I could talk to them to get some help and insight on how I should, step into these kind of roles. They weren't in my organization, they were very many levels up.
Okay.
But, that started that way. And once we established mentorships are also a lot of trust, right? You are
Hmm.
opening up to someone, you have to maintain confidentiality, and it not all of them gel the first time. So it's your different personality. So I've had some mentors for 7 8 years now, and we have moved on and stuff, and we've talked about it. But there might be the person you might have an interaction only 2 times, but they might give
Hmm.
you something. Sometimes it might be someone who's newer than you or junior to you, especially with the way technology is changing now.
Yeah.
They may end up mentoring you. Like I lean into people to show me social media because I have no idea about it.
Yeah,
So,
of course.
I'm getting mentored by people, young people like my niece, to show me how do I do social media and what to do about it.
Hmm.
So,
And you're getting
but
mentorship from her.
exactly, and everybody needs a mentor because I I've done a whole season talking about mentorship and how to establish a relationship and do that. And I realized that when I talk to people, oftentimes we've had it maybe when we were in school, then a decade went by and we didn't even think about it. And the reason is it gives you someone to talk to who might look at where you can aspire to and give you some guidance.
Hmm.
And the other thing I would take it even a step further is to build a board of advisors or a
Hmm.
board of directors, like a company builds. And they can be in your career, they can be in your financial life, they can be there. And these are people who will come, some will stay on it, some just like a board will stay and will exit it at a
Hmm.
different point. And for you to leverage, who would you call for certain questions? Because I've been pivoting, and for different things I call different people. Some are
Of course.
sounding boards.
Hmm.
So I would say take some time and establish it, because life will just happen and flow by, and it's very hard. We're all constrained for time, so we have
Of
to think
course.
about how to do it.
So what I'll do also, now that you say this, is I'll ask for some links of episodes from your series on mentorship, because this is something that interests me a lot, and I know that little interest the beyond the thesis audience. Now, thinking about this experience of being helped, being mentored by other people, and finding kind of mm, your way to be present in the organization that you were in, that that you developed throughout the years. Thinking of women who are now entering their first positions in an organization, what would you say were, because you said someone, like, someone tells you, oh, why are you not doing this or that? What were things at the beginning that you were not doing, that you learned from these people, and that helped you grow your career, grow your confidence, and grow your independence in a way, professionally?
And yeah, it's been a journey, right? I think when you come as an immigrant, or when you come cultural differences, the cultures that I come from, you don't, I guess, talk about yourself. And it's
Hmm.
very different in the US. You have to speak about yourself, which is very hard to do it
Oh
in a
yes.
sort of tasteful way. Especially for women, it's even more harder because um you can be, there's this cartoon that I have, someone sent me, and there's two women are talking. I'll come back to your question, but the reason I want to
Go,
state
no.
this is there are two women, typing on their computer facing away from each other, and one asks, what's the difference between aggressive and assertive? And the other one, without looking back, says gender. So,
I
and
love it.
and it is something that women struggle with, and even we may do the judging ourselves or amongst other women. So it's very hard. You walk a very fine line between being vocal and not vocal and being heard. So there's all this background noise that happens.
Hmm.
But the way I'd say for someone, if I were to do it now again, right, and this is what I would tell someone: when you're stepping into a job, there's so many things, take some time, figure out what the job is. But in the first few weeks, I would meet with the manager, find out how the organization is set up, meet the team members, figure out what they are, what do they do, learn from them. Maybe they have training documents, find out what your role is about, and get as much absorption as you can. Spend time learning it. And the reason I say take notes is because sometimes you'll meet people who'll have these conversations, but they may not have taken notes, and they often come back for the same thing. Then you
Hmm.
kind of start to lose the credibility, and people will lose interest in having that conversation
Of
because
course.
you're coming back to the same thing. And set up a one-on-one with your boss every 2 weeks at least, if not once a week,
Okay.
and find out what it is and follow up that conversation. Take notes of what you have done. And performance reviews happen in every organization once a year, maybe twice a year, like on a 6 month. But really, if you're having a career conversation, and start them early, right? If you're
Hmm.
listening to this, you're already ahead of the curve. Most of us don't realize till 5 years in what we want to do. But if you're listening to something like this podcast, and on his other on Papa PhD's David's other episodes, start thinking about what you want to do. And you can change your mind at any point of time. It doesn't mean you have to stick to the whole path, but find out, what do they have technical pathways, do they have managerial pathways, there are certain projects, or I like this group. A lot of organizations now have rotation programs
Okay.
because you know so they move them in different groups and you get experience, and start doing projects, diving into things, learning from it, engaging in meetings. And if you don't know, and you're not don't want to speak up in the meeting when you don't know anything, meet with the people who are organizing it or something outside of it. Learn a little
Hmm.
bit, do some research, and step in and ask questions. When you ask questions, try to see if you can have a solution, because it's not always about stating a problem.
Hmm.
People can state it, but they want someone who can also help provide a way to think. And it's okay to have a different way of thinking about it. That's what drives innovative solutions.
Hmm. Of course. It's interesting because all that you've just said in the last couple of minutes could also totally apply to going through grad school completely. Take part in meetings, talk with the people who are organizing them, try to make yourself useful in other groups, etc. But coming back to our context, it's just interesting to me because it was just, I was just making these connections. But it's it feels to me like a lot of what you're saying revolves around, in the end, human relationships and conversations, productive conversations, not just chewing the fat, but when you're vocal, when you raise your voice, being sure that you're, like you said, bringing a solution, and helping someone, even if they're not your direct colleague, or they're not in your department. Because it's interesting. You also mentioned the rotations, which I think is a cool model for onboarding people. But it looks, from what I've heard in other conversations, that modern organizations are actually pretty open to you evolving within the organization, not only linearly, but also horizontally, in changing groups, or changing responsibilities, depending on your interests, on, like you said, the solutions that you bring, and kind of the color you bring to your interactions. Is that something that you experience, this kind of flexibility of designing a career path within an organization?
Yeah, so I'll start back. Actually, I'll lean into mentorship. So when I first found a mentor, it was through a formal program. Like, one of the ERG diversity initiatives had a mentoring program. So I was able to find one. And she introduced me to this concept called informational interviews, this mentor I
Yes.
had. So you're absolutely right. Whatever we were talking about could be done during your thesis, right? Especially when people are doing a PhD.
Hmm.
I didn't do it as much, but maybe on hindsight, maybe it also was the transition from country to country. My
Hmm.
advisor was nice about sending us to conferences and putting us in like the Society of Women all of these Sigma Psi, these technical organizations. So people should be part of their professional organization.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's Society of Women Engineers, mechanical, whatever it is. Start being active in them. Take a leadership role because it gives you access to people. It gives you
Hmm.
access to opportunities or projects or ideas. I mean, even if you're technical, you still need access. If
Of
you think,
course.
oh, I don't want to do the personal side, it sounds very sort of not sticky enough. You still need access, otherwise you're not going to get the project you want to work on.
Hmm.
So the way she did it is she introduced me to the first person and she made me prepare a slide on who I was and what I did. And when I met the first person, I would talk to them. So I did this for a year after I came back to work when I was a stay-at-home mom,
Oh,
because I
wow.
knew I wanted to transition to another role in the company. And that time rotation programs and all didn't really exist. This rotation program, I think most companies have done it sort of only in the last few years, just as a
Hmm.
cultural shift. So I had to kind of figure out what I wanted to do. So I would meet with somebody. I always send people a calendar invite. I never send them an email because we get hundreds of emails and we never see them. So
It's true.
I would put a calendar invite for 30 minutes and say, hey, this is who I am. I want to talk to you about this. Sometimes they may have job openings, which I may or may not, but I would still wanted to talk. And maybe 30 minutes, an hour before, I would send them a slide or a resume and then go and talk to them and say, hey, this is who I am. Ask them about their role. What do their organization do? So I was in engineering. I would talk to planning, marketing, oh God, systems, application, everybody, sales, all sorts of groups, because I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I wanted to find out what the roles were.
Hmm.
And every time I ended a conversation, depending on how it went, if it went really well, I would ask two things. One is if they needed help, though I know, because sometimes they may not understand how a factory works. So it could be
Hmm.
something simple, right? Or, you could help them with a connection or something. And then the second thing I would ask is if they suggest who else I talk to. So that's how you kind of build on it. So then they would
Of
give me the
course.
next person. And if it went well, I would ask if they would give me an introduction. So they may introduce me to somebody. And sort of then by the time you have the third conversation, say I'm with marketing, you know some of the lingo now.
Of
And so you
course.
can leverage that lingo to have a conversation. And by then I had a grid map of, which roles I wanted to do and which roles I didn't want to do. So it kind of helped me focus on it. So
Super.
that's sort of a skill. If a rotation program does not exist in your organization, or even if you want to pivot your career, you want to change industries, whatever, I think that technique that kind of my mentor showed me, I think can be leveraged in any forum. If you're coming back to work after a break, you could do that because the landscape has changed.
Of
You need to
course.
sort of re-energize your connections. Start doing that and figuring out what you want to do.
I love it. Yeah, informational interviews, I think, are key in actually making sense of your career journey, and laying the uh, foundations for what's the next chapter, because there's always a next chapter. And if you know the terrain, it's much easier to navigate than just saying, okay, now I'm leaving and now I have to scramble and find, find my bearings, etc. So I really, really like it. But I also like the your approach of kind of then treating that data kind of as a scientist, right? Of having a grid and having a, which is it's very it's very on character for a PhD to do to take that approach. But yeah, I think this is for me one of the nuggets of these conversations that I want people to take home is having a structured way. And informational interviews are a structured way of having conversations that are um, that have a sense, that have a kind of an objective, although they're not transactional. I think is key for anyone, but in particular, and even more for women who want to be very strategic and to build their career in a very intent, in a very thought through way.
Yeah, and you're right. I think that I like that you picked the word transactional, because when I've had conversations, when I did a LinkedIn live called expanding your network, I realized that people's hesitancy around networking is the transactional basis, and it's not about being transactional. Actually, it's completely the opposite. It's about building a relationship. Either you have a common thread. Okay, we are both podcasters, and we both obviously are interested in the PhD part of it, so that
Mhm.
is something that connects us, right?
Of
So you'll
course.
always find a common ground somewhere, or maybe you haven't found it and that's what you're exploring, and almost everybody is willing to help you. So you have to kind of think about how to leverage, because you have to give back. Even for a
Exactly.
mentor mentee relationship, you have to give back to your mentor. It could be suggesting something that they have not seen, maybe a technology. Like to my mentor, I'm sharing, this is this thing I saw, I thought this might be of interest to you. Maybe there are these roles that I think you would be great for. So there are things you can do about it as well.
Yeah. Sirisha, we're reaching the end of the interview. Before we go on and try to have a little sum up and a last take home message for people watching or for the listeners, can you please share where people can find you? I have, for people watching, I have some contacts going here at the bottom of the screen, but for those who are going to be just listening in the podcast, if they want to learn a little bit more about you, if they have some specific questions they want to ask you, how is the best way to reach out to you?
Yeah, so I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. That's really the best place to reach me. Connect with me on that, Sirisha Kuchimanchi. I do spend some time on Instagram. Those sort of
Okay.
are my two platforms, so women, career, and life. But like David said, I have a podcast, Women, Career, and Life. So take a listen. Some of the topics that we talked about, I do talk about it there. I talk about a lot around women and leadership and things. But it's interesting, I find, though my podcast is called Women, Career, and Life, about 30% of the listeners, at least through Spotify, says that are men listening to it,
Oh, there you
because
go.
the topics, still apply to them. I mean, it's
Of
still about
course.
leadership and feedback and conversations with your boss and whatever else might be the way to go forward.
Of
So
course.
LinkedIn is I guess my sweet spot to end up listening to me.
Excellent. No, and it makes total sense that 30% of men listen, and because if you we go back to the beginning of our conversation, and at a certain point you mentioned that in the culture where I come from, it's not well perceived to talk about yourself, right? In the same way, people in the job market are not all Americans or Canadians. I come from Portugal. People come from all over the world, from cultures where I don't know, the relationship with authority is difficult, or not so easy. Talking about yourself also, there's a lot of cultures where it's frowned upon, and you can be a man coming from such a culture and kind of identify and be interested in hearing these conversations that are happening on women, career, and life on your podcast. It makes total sense to me.
Yeah, exactly. And you bring up the cultural aspect, right? Because there is, when I talk to people from Latin America, from Africa,
Hmm.
from different parts, there's a lot of overlap on how people show up. So, Southeast Asia, South Asia, and stuff. And, some structures are very hierarchical also, right? So you're not going to bypass the hierarchy.
Hmm.
While in the US culture, you can tend to bypass the hierarchy because there's open door policy. So I always urge people to have a conversation called skip level, one level up your boss and meet with them as well. So from a cultural context, I that's why, to address that, I sort of started Sahita, which is like the South Asian community for women, because for career and finances, because as women, at least in my personal experience and conversations I have, we manage our careers, we may be doing great, but sometimes we don't always manage our finances. And I think it's important to sync them up,
Mhm.
because we need to have that sort of financial independence. It's not about,
Oops.
changing the dynamics at home so much, but you need to be aware, right? Because life happens. And just like I talked about proactive and reactive at work, you have to be proactive. You can't, when life happens, it's too reactive and too stressful to make changes then.
Yes,
And
it's true. It's better to be prepared and proactive than, yeah, than scrambling. Kind of like I said too, for careers, than just scrambling at the last minute to figure out what's the next step.
yep.
I totally agree. Sirisha, looking back at our conversation, and it's funny. I'm kind of really actually going to kind of rewind in a certain way. We ended up in talking about informational interviews and how they were key and instrumental in having you figure out where you wanted to go and taking the right decisions, and then to be able to change your career path into something that you'd liked better, where you'd show up, in a more productive way, let's say, because when we're doing what we like, we're better at what we do. um and it feels to me like, again, like rewinding a little bit, all of our conversation, if there's one line, even going until the informational interview, there's one kind of silver lining to me. There's one line, one I don't one thread that
Hmm.
I think goes through everything, which is communicating and having productive conversations with people around you. So eh, if you are, when you're an immigrant, when you are just being a woman, you can tend to uh, isolate yourself or not speak up, and it feels like you're, allowing yourself to have a voice, and then practicing also how to, and this is where we go back to informational interviews, practicing this voice, practicing learning new lingo, etc., etc. I think it's a thread that goes through the whole conversation that we had. Well, and of course, conversations means not only your voice, but it means the people you are talking with, and this is where we go back to mentorship, and kind of um, this kind of mentee mentor relationship, where you need to be able to ask questions when you need to ask questions, being open to learn even from people who are younger, or don't have a degree, if you do have a degree. So it really feels to me like, and it's interesting that we're both podcasters, but it feels to me that a lot of a big part of navigating career is finding your voice and nurturing your voice, and your voice in the professional setting, right? And kind of shaping it to a way that works for you, but that works for people listening to you, be they managers, be they people on the factory floor. I don't know if you have a last reflection on that, and the last word for young researchers who are considering doing the leap to industry, and who are maybe a little bit afraid of it.
You said it so beautifully. I mean, it's hard to add to what you just said, but I mean, just to reinforce the message, right? Whether you're in academia, whether you venture out to be an entrepreneur, whether you work in industry, because I did research, then I was in industry. I'm on my pathway to an entrepreneurship journey. You have to find that voice, and it doesn't mean the same that someone else shows up, right? And
Hmm.
it's an evolving journey. Who I am today wasn't how I spoke 5 years ago, so, and won't be probably 5 years from now. And finding that, and being intentional about the conversations. When people think of networking, sort of being relationship building, I do want to reiterate, especially because we are talking to a largely sort of technical population, if they're doing PhD in whichever field, it is about leaning into your technical knowledge, not giving up the core of who you are. It's not about having like hang out with your buddies and are happy. That's not what we are meaning. We are meaning technical relationships. It could be other things. It is important because you all have to solve problems collectively. Rarely is a problem solved on your own,
Hmm.
either to understand it, to reach it. So I would say start asking questions, building those. And I keep going back to that and looking for mentors at different points, because I had one in grad school through the graduate school program. And
Okay.
I remember, I wish I remember the lady's name, because I would love to thank her again. She worked on the Hubble telescope in NASA, which I thought was
Oh,
the coolest thing then. And
of
I still
course.
think is. So, I've had a lot of people along the way who have helped ask questions. And my questions to her at that point were non technical. I
Hmm.
asked her about how do you manage family, how do you manage kids, what do I do if both of us have PhDs, how do we find jobs? Because that's another thing that people wonder, right? How do you both
Hmm.
find, because it narrows your scope. So asking people questions, you never know where the answer will come from.
Of course.
So
Thank you, Sirisha. This has been great. It's been really a pleasure having this conversation with you. I really like the where we went with the conversation, and I think it's going to be helpful to a lot of people out there, be they women or not. And yeah, I want to commend you for all the work you're putting into having these platforms, and including radio, podcast, and this community. So yeah, for anyone listening, find Sirisha if you're interested in asking some more questions on LinkedIn. And yeah, and even if it's just to thank her for this hour almost that we spent here talking about this. So Sudisha, thank you so much for having accepted my invitation and for having been on Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD.
thank you, David. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I'm always game to connect with people. So reach out to me if they want to have questions too.
Excellent. That's it. This does it for the live recording. Thank you to anyone who is watching or has been watching live on LinkedIn or YouTube, or Facebook or Twitter. Actually, we were also on those two platforms. And that's it for today. As always, if you are interested in this subject, go follow the Srisha's podcast on whichever platform you prefer. Of course, follow Beyond the Thesis. Also, you can find it in every platform. And also, if you're watching on YouTube, do subscribe to the channel. We're almost we're on our way to 400. I want to get to 500 subscribers, because it opens the doors to some other functionalities that I don't have yet. And that's it. Thanks to everyone who is watching, and see you on the next live recording of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD.
Bye.